Jayu Yang is easily one of the most experienced entrepreneurs in the Taiwanese bike industry. Her grandfather started Kenda Tire in 1962, and she carried on the family tradition by taking over her father's business, Kendstone, in 2001. Kendstone is among the top premium bicycle assemblers in Taiwan. In Taiwanese culture, women were not typically considered for running a family business. Therefore, her path to running Kendstone was unexpected as her father was in need of a trusted manager during a time of crisis. She grew the company substantially throughout the 2000s and sold the company in 2019. She stayed on as the CEO until 2021. This conversation aims to give you a look inside the workings of the cycling industry from a Taiwanese perspective. This is the Business of Cycling podcast. So Jayu, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited to have a veteran from the industry in Taiwan come on and tell us a little bit about tell us your story, because it's such a big part of cycling. I've been, working in the business for a while, had this podcast for just under a year, and we talk a lot about the business of cycling, but, in the background, not so much in the background, but as a huge component of cycling, there is the production in Taiwan. And so I guess today, again, like I said, thank you so much for coming on. We're excited. I'm excited to share, to learn, and to share about, this gigantic piece of the cycling business that, sometimes isn't quite as visible to the public as, as it could be, as it should be. So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here. It's also a new experience for me to share my experience in Taiwan with others.
Is there something cultural about that? Is it sort of always been not a secret, but just discreet about what you guys do? Has that been an attitude?
I would think so because I think most of, in the past, Taiwan bike industry has a long history. So for example, like my family, we start from my grandfather and we were mostly in the OEM and ODM business. So I think it's become, actually it's out of the respect to our customers. So people will always be a little bit quiet, not talking too much about who they work with or what they're doing. But I think it's changing now with the new generation, and they are more vocal about it. So I think you will see more is coming, and I think Taiwan bike business will be more vocal in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. So to get started, can you tell me your story, how you got started? I know your family has been in the business for a long time. Can you start from the beginning, how you got started, or perhaps maybe even how your family got started in the business?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jayu Yang, okay, and my grandfather and my father started Kenda Tire since 1962. And before that, when my grandfather was 55, and before that, he was one of the founder of Duro Tire. So he have a very deep relationship in the tire industry. So that's how we get. So you can see image that I definitely are living and breathing the bicycle industry since I was born.
And
And after a few years, so after a few years, because I have two uncles, younger uncles, they returned from school from States. So my father just left the company and start his own bicycle trading, Kenlai, and also bicycle assembler, Kendstone. So that's basically my family background.
So your grandfather started a tire company. What was the first tire company you said?
The first car company that was a joint venture is Duro,
Duro. Okay.
Duro.
Okay. Is it still around?
Yeah, it's still around. It's still a public company.
And then after Duro, he left Duro and started Kenda, which I know Kenda very well. Kenda's a gigantic company. Is that still
Thank you.
in your family?
Yes, right now it's that was managing by my uncles, two uncles. And yeah, and of course that my family, like my sister, she is still at the board of Kenda.
And then your
So
father,
yeah,
And then your father was with Kenda, I'm assuming, but then he wanted to start his own business. So why did he want to get away and start? Because you said he started Kendstone, which is an assembler, and we can get into Kendstone more, but why did your father want to start his own business?
I think he has a different opinion with his father, like all the family. And briefly mentioned because my father he can speak fluently English and Japanese. So at the time, most of the business was done by trading company. Of course, that was a safe approach, but at the time, it's also less opportunity. So my father think, okay, he would like to start his own trading company and bring the business to Kenda. But I think it turned out that he also developing the business to something else.
So there was this dynamic of the trading company. Now, was the trading company something that I know the trading companies are big in Japan, but there are also
Hmm.
trading companies that would work with the U.S. as well.
Yes.
And so what are these
Yes.
trading companies like? What did they look like at the time?
Oh, so at the time, so just giving a little bit background, my father was born in 1938. So at the time, who can speak fluently English were not that there were many people who could speak English at the time. So there was a group of people. So for example, like I don't know, have you heard about Victor Song? He has been the general manager of a Raleigh and Derby in Taiwan for many years.
Okay, so the
And also,
language was sort of the key at the time because it was very difficult to learn English.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
and so your father, so whoever spoke English kind of had this key to the outside world. And
yes.
that seems crazy to me that would be because I mean it must have been very hard to find, must have been it's hard to think about that today because it's so easy to learn.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not easy, but
Yeah,
it's more available. But your father, it sounds like he saw that there was that opportunity there, that was sort of the
yeah.
key to open up the other markets. And so did he then make it a goal of his own to learn English?
Yes, I think he just have the talent of learning English, well, in language, so he can speak English and Japanese both language. That's also give him a lot of advantage.
How did he learn those?
I don't know, by himself.
Okay.
I think he learned in school. He has a very high interest. So he started very hard and he listened to the radio because at the time TV was also very rare. And he listened to the radio and, learning from like ICRT at the time that was huge in Taiwan as of from America. And then I said, great. And also he wasn't shy to talk to foreigners. I think that he kind of like, and she reading a lot of English newspaper, Japanese newspaper. He still have that habit today.
Okay. And so he just sort of had this spark where he was like, I have to do something more than just being a manufacturer, more than just being a seller to, because it sounds like there was the manufacturers, the trading companies which did all of the export, and
Yes.
then the trading companies were sort of your gateway to the market in the US and in Japan, which in the 80s was the biggest 70s and 80s. Japan was gigantic, and those were the two biggest
Yeah.
markets. So
Yeah.
your father was like, look, I don't want to just be a producer. I want to be on that side of things. And he started Kendstone, you said. And Kendstone was can you tell me more about Kendstone, what it did and what it does?
Oh, okay. So he has a two company. One is Kenlight. Kenlight is trading company, but then he had a problem with a supplier. Supplier didn't deliver on time, so he said he at the time he lost a huge business. So then he think, okay, I have to coordinate the supply chain and the sales side. So he started a Kenstone that is assembly factory in Taichung.
Oh yeah.
So he control the sales and also he can control the sales and also the supply chain side.
So he said, okay, I'm going to
So
start a trading company. He started doing the trading company, doing the export, but then he saw that there was some inefficiencies or some reliability issues with the assemblers. Was it? He said he got burned by
Yes.
some big order that he had, and so he
Yeah.
probably hurt his reputation. And he said, "Look, I can't do this anymore." And then he started his own assembly business. And that was Kendstone.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, what an interesting story. So he's like, look, I gotta do all this by myself. And how did, I guess, were you already, I suppose you were pretty young at the time, but were you around for a
Mhm.
lot of this?
No, actually, I didn't. So
Okay.
first of all, because in Asia, so in Asia they still have a sexual discrimination. So I was born as a girl, and I wasn't expected to join the business
So women in
at the time.
in your culture weren't expected to be part of the business. So you weren't allowed, I guess, or it just culturally wasn't normal for you to be involved in the business at that time, is what you're saying.
Yeah, actually, it's not allowed. Just not you were not being expected.
Okay.
So people were just thinking like, okay, you just go to study hard, learning accounting, managing financial side, that would be the best, and then find a good husband, and then having some kids, and then raise them, and better you have the boys out. Yeah, that's very at the time that was actually very traditional.
But you didn't,
So
but that's not what happened though.
yeah, well, actually, so that was funny. So actually, my original goal was to become a history professor. And so I never touched any of my father's or family business at all. So I remember that was when I was in graduate school and my master degree. And my father's business he encountered a very heavy headwind. So he have to stay in China, and he couldn't manage in the Taiwan factory. He didn't have anyone who he can trust to manage in the Taiwan factory. So my parents just say, "Hey, Jayu, okay, learning history probably not going to give you rich. And so how about you come back to family business and help with Kendstone, the managing Kendstone in Taiwan, and we need your help." So basically, that's how I've been thrown into the bike business.
So they needed someone. There were issues with the business. Your father just couldn't come back because he had some things happening, but they needed someone they could trust. And I'm assuming they knew that you were pretty smart, that you were pretty skilled. I mean, they obviously, you're being your parents, but it sounded like they trusted you from that standpoint to give you that opportunity.
Well, I think so, but at the time, I think they are also they didn't really have too much choice.
There was no one.
And my major, no one. Then my major is history, but I have another major is economy. So
Okay.
they say, hey, you have learned something about business, so maybe probably is a good fit.
Okay. And so they said, look, we need your help, is what they said.
Yeah, they basically just throw me into a business that which I never touched before.
And what year would this
But
have been?
anyway, it's fun.
What year around
That
would
is
this have been?
that was 2001.
So you were just finishing up your studies and your parents they call
Yeah,
you and they say, "Hey, look, we need you to run our business." And how big
yeah.
would the business have been at that time, if you can tell me?
Yeah, well, actually, at the time, Kendstone wasn't big. Actually, remember we said we have a strong headwind. So actually, we Kendstone were losing money. We're not doing fantastic well. So the first thing is, I think that at the time we only had let me calculate from NT dollar to US dollar. I think that was around 100 to 800 million NT dollar business.
800 million or 800,000?
800 million NT dollar business.
Okay, that's a that's really big. How many employees, more or less?
Oh, at the time, it's probably like a 200.
200 employees. Okay. So not a small
Yeah.
business.
No, so that is about like a 26 million US dollar
Ah,
business.
26 million. Okay. So that's a big
Yeah.
company. That's a big company. But you were saying that you guys were losing money. If it was 2001,
Yeah.
there was a global economic kind of correction that happened in 2001. I'm assuming that
Yeah.
that was part of it because I know the stock market sort of there was a crash at that time, so it must have all came together with that because I know that that was a global crash. So when you came in, what did you find when you came into the business?
No, I think actually, so at the time I didn't really think too much because we have, our family have our own brand called Haro. So basically, Haro was our biggest customer alone. And also, by 2001, that was a timing a lot of American brand is shifting their production to China because the price and cost issue. So we also have to, in Taiwan, Kendstone, Taiwan, we're losing a lot of customer to China. And originally that we were famous for making BMX, but I don't think that would be sustainable for manufacture in Taiwan. We have to level up. We have to manufacture something more high end. So since you got the goal, and then you just try to look for higher end customers. That's how we started to try to transfer Kendstone from a BMX manufacturer to a high-end like mountain bike and road bike manufacturer in the future.
So there was sort of this rush to China for the price point because the costs or the Taiwanese were losing the Taiwan manufacturing was losing the lower price point products, but you saw that there was an opportunity for the higher end because I'm assuming the higher end were still being done in Europe. Some of the higher end
Yeah.
was still being done in Europe. So you said, look, we can be specialized in in higher end OEM for Europe for road and mountain bike. Is that was your thinking?
Yes. And at the time also GT Shrink, they bankrupt. I don't know if you remember.
They went bankrupt.
Yes.
Okay. And how did
So
how did that affect your how did that affect you guys?
oh well, I think we lost $1 million of bad debts to GT. And we are not even the biggest. We are still the smallest, one of the smallest. I remember by the time Merida has been hurt badly, I think they manufacture Swing, Strongman manufacture GT, Fritz is they make a lot of GT bike, and Sunfar. So I remember totally is like a 12 bike assembler
That
in
were
Taiwan has been suffered
that
from
suffered
GT
because
and Swing.
wow, yeah, I'm looking at that now. In 2001, Schwinn was bankrupt and so you guys lost whatever credit you had from Schwinn once they went bankrupt.
Yeah, Swing and GT. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So you had so you get thrown into this thing. China is taking away business for your BMX business. Schwinn goes bankrupt and you guys are left holding $1 million in product. And was it this had to have been scary for you because this is your family business you're holding and you're trying to take care of it. Well, I'm assuming your father was working with other business units that you guys had that had trying to keep things afloat. I mean, was it a scary time for you?
Well, I think it maybe because too scary, so you already forgot what scary it was.
I love this. That's true. When it's that bad, you just kind of forget about it. You just go.
Yeah, you try to get the money back, try to argue with them, and you have to limit your loss. So that's basically you're very. I was just very busy trying to find a solution to limit our loss. That's it.
Wow.
I didn't
And
even think too much.
no, I get it. I get it. And it sounds like this is where you kind of figured out who you were as a person and as a professional too, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a quick way to grow, I guess.
Totally. Totally.
Mm.
So so things are bad, but you had a vision. You said that you wanted to begin assembling for higher end bikes. So did you at some point start approaching manufacturers in Europe or how did you start doing that?
No, we actually at the time because our strong suit, we're still stronger in USA market, in the North American market. So we try to approach a North America brand to try to ask for the chance to work with them, such as Norco and Sabelo. And then from there, I expand to Europe. Then we also working with Bianchi and Conago, BH. The list can go on.
Wow. So you became at Kendstone, you became it sounds like one of the leaders in assembly for higher end road or also a mountain bike.
Yes. Again, at the time, I really didn't think too much. But then now look back at the time, probably Fritz also, they transferred themselves into high-end business. And Kendstone also transfers. I think we are the two who have transferred ourselves into high-end business quite successfully. Of course, Fritz Drew is much bigger size. That's a different story.
Right. So fast forward, you're closing these contracts, and at what point did you kind of think to yourself, "Wow, okay, I think this is going to work, and I think I like doing this"? Was it a couple years later where you said, "Look, this is when things sort of stabilized, and you thought to yourself, you know, I really like doing this, and I think this is kind of what I was meant to do"?
So first of all, well, luckily the company is making profit. We'll be able to pay off the debts. So when you look at the financial report, it's all blacks, then you'll be happy. That's for sure. And also along the way, we have established a good relationship with our customers. So for example, like with Norco, I remember clearly the first year order is only 2 container a year, total year, only 2 container. And when I left Kendstone, they're already the top 3 for us. Couple like a 220,000 bike-ish, become very big, and also Sabelo. So we have a tip. I really like that because you kind of like I try to provide the value and service, support their growth from very little and to where they are now. I feel it have a self-satisfaction there. And at the same time, you also become very good friend with your customers.
Right. And so this was in all the effects a true partnership with these
Yes.
companies. Now,
Yes.
being this deep into the partnership, I have to ask the question, you're still sort of invisible in a sense that you're not like all of this is based on the relationship. And I suppose like is that something that always I guess for me, from you know Norco or like you said, Cervelo, like they get the brand value, and the only thing that this is sort of a controvert. I guess it's sort of it's just sort of a concept that I wanted to bring up was your company didn't get any of that brand value, so it's all based in the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is that something that do you think that Taiwan now is going to begin trying to recover? Because I think at that point, you're always in a weaker position. It's just something from a business standpoint.
This is not an easy question to answer. So I think for OEM business, of course, it has its limitation. But sometimes when you look at that, it's also quite stable. So because we have a brand company, so we know what kind of a risk of the brand. But when you are manufacturer, so for example, like when the brand placing the order, especially in North America, they didn't get any promise from their customers. That's
Sure.
also why Specialized at the time, they have to find money. They need to find shareholder Merida to rescue their company. So that was basically the background. But as a manufacturer, you can just push your customer to pay you. So the cash flow, as long as you're choosing the right customer, that is the key point.
No,
So I think that this I know like a lot of Taiwanese at the time, we are relatively conservative. So I know a lot of people, they are pretty happy where they are right now because they don't necessarily want to take the risk of being a brand. So for example, like let me take a very simple example. As a manufacturer, I can invest this machine and I know the output, I can immediately calculate the return on the investment. But if you are a brand and you invest on marketing, on product development, sometimes the return on investment is very difficult to calculate. And I think a lot of Taiwanese manufacturers, they don't like that risk and uncertainty.
No, that's a beautiful answer. It's an absolutely beautiful answer. And it makes sense that the brands they do get the upside, but they also have gigantic potential downside if things don't work. Or
Yeah.
if there's bad news about their brand, or if something, if there's a crash and at a race and it's, because of the brand, the manufacturer doesn't get blamed. It's the brand that gets blamed.
Yeah. Yes.
Definitely.
So I have a simple example. Now you look at many. Now you look. So right now the bike industry is in the very top situation right now, and a lot of company actually go out of business. But have you seen any Taiwanese supplier go out of business? Zero.
So that's because let's talk about that. This is an interesting point that you're making here. So you're saying, and we can get into COVID. I want to get into COVID in a moment here, but you're saying that when the crisis hits, that the manufacturers, like, they have a much shorter, we'll say, risk profile, in a sense that they get the orders, they produce the product, they get paid for the orders. Whereas the brand, they don't have the orders. They have to estimate the demand. And so they're the ones that have to front all of the money for the product and for the inventory to sell. So they're the ones that are essentially assuming the majority of the risk. So what you're saying is now that there is an excess inventory, that none of the manufacturers have really had to, have been put in a bad position because of that. Is that correct?
Well, I think I need to put a little bit more detail and background.
Sure.
So of course, I think so first of all, you have to understand the interest rate in Taiwan is much, much lower than Europe and USA nowadays.
Okay.
So we didn't get burned by high interest rate. And secondly, I think a lot of Taiwanese suppliers, they have been in business for a long time. So the support from the bank is actually more solid. Like they wouldn't just pull away immediately.
Right.
They probably were increasing with the interest rate, but it's not too bad, because some of the banks still owned by the government, and their job is to stabilize the company, the enterprise. So I think that with the big support from the bank and also the relatively lower interest rate, actually a lot of bike suppliers in Taiwan, they are in the relatively better position. But of course, I'm not saying they are easy.
No.
But you also have to see it from two different aspects, is category. So I would say parts maker and bike assemble company. I think bike assembly company, actually they are suffering more because they're holding the inventory right now.
Right. Can we talk?
Buffer.
Can we talk about that? Because now that there are, I guess what I had heard anecdotally is that in certain situations, when an assembler takes an order, they are owner of the inventory for a certain amount of time, in a sense that so there is a piece where they are investing into that inventory, and it sounds like that some of the assemblers are currently holding a lot of product on behalf of the brands. Is that correct?
That's 200% correct.
Okay. And why? So you're saying that generally an assembler does have a more healthy and more diversified business, like we said, and less risk than the brands themselves. But in this situation here, as you said, because of the bottleneck, because of the slowdown in demand, some of the assemblers are holding on to more inventory. But as you said, they have more support from the banks potentially, and they have lower interest rates, so it's not as damaging to them. At least they seem to be in a better position than in Europe or in the US, right?
Well, so first of all, I think that you have to separate. When I say it's healthier position, that was before pandemic.
Okay.
So I think the pandemic, that definitely hurting a lot of bike assembly factory. I know there's a lot of my friends, they are holding tons of inventory because their customer cannot pay them.
Well,
However,
so you left just to kind of give people more understanding of where you're at personally. So you left, your family sold Kendstone in 2021, right?
no, my family, we sold Kendstone at 2019.
2019.
And I left. Yes, and I left because, after transition, all the thing, I left by 2020, beginning of 2021.
Okay, so your family sold the company in 2019. That was a decision, and then we'll get into what happened in the pandemic, just so we can kind of keep the story continuous here. So in 2019, was it your father or you said, look, this business is maybe you got a good offer. I don't know. Why did you sell?
So that was basically my decision. I think by 2017, I found there's a bottleneck myself. I cannot make Kendstone into the next level. So actually, Kendstone at the time was pretty successful. So we actually, once upon a time, we reached $200 million US turnover. Like we have a stable cash flow and we have very good customer portfolio. Yeah, everything is good. But at the same time, when I look at the future at the 2017, I knew that we had to change. But I don't think I'm capable to make that huge change because that will require a lot of investment and the time. And the Kendstone is really, really, I already put my 150% energy on Kendstone, and I cannot do anything else. And I think sometimes success can be an ankle and also a baggage. So if you really want to, when you see the future, you probably have to change. But at the time, like I said, Kendstone already like an 80 million to 100 million US dollar company with such big ship, and you can't really just change the direction that easy. So, and also at the same time, I have other personal goal. And like I mentioned, my grandfather started Kenda at 55 years old. So I also want to do something different before I turn 50. So I kind of like thinking about, okay, what I can do, what else I can do. And 2018, one of my friends, she's working at Deloitte. And then she called me. She said, hey, Jayu, there's an electronic company. They want to buy a bike assembly company. Do you want to talk to them? I said, well, for sure. Yes, I want to talk to them. So, well, actually, that's it. I think at the time, I saw that's a opportunity for me to get off the boat. And also to maybe handing the company to, well, at the time, I think that was a good choice because they are pretty big. They are from electronic company and they are pretty big and they make money. So I think that was a good choice. So we only spent like 3 months, then we make the deal. But it turned out to be another nightmare. We can talk about that later. But that was basically because I have other goal in my life and I want to do something different. And I also see the limitation of the bike assembler. So for example, just to echo back, yes, bike assembly factory usually become a buffer. We are the buffer of a parts maker and brand. So we knew that someday that bicycle assembler, we have to carry these parts. Our cash flow will be held because of all this thing.
Because of the
Of course,
parts.
by 2017, yes, by 2017, it didn't happen yet. But at the time, I just had a feeling that it would happen. And I don't like it.
What would
because,
happen that you would be required to have a big amount of parts on hand, where you would have a lot of capital stuck inside the business? Is that was your worry?
Yeah, that was my worry. So again, when the higher end bicycle we manufacture, the tougher parts maker they are. Like we are dealing with DT Swiss, with SRAM, with Shimano, with Bosch. Well, try to negotiate with them. That's almost impossible.
Right. And
So
so
you
knew there would be situations where being a buffer for these in this type of a situation would be incredibly dangerous for your company.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I worry. That was always my worry.
Right. Right. And I'm assuming that getting out in 2019 was a good time to get out, because I presume that things got pretty ugly for the assemblers during the pandemic.
And well, I think yes and no. I always believe that all the risk, all the never waste any good crisis. So if things changing, so if there's a crisis, if you can managing that well, that can also be your benefit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So I think that really depends on what the company how they handle the whole situation. But again, yes, in general, it's quite ugly.
so you left the company, you said, or you sold the company in 2019, but you managed it up until 2021.
Yeah. So like a 1.5 year.
And so you lived through the pandemic, the first part, at least the first big part of the pandemic.
Yes, exactly.
Can you tell us about what that was like?
Mm, you mean the company wise or
Yeah.
the reason why I left the company?
Well, sure. I mean, I guess I'm just curious to know what that whole experience was like as an assembler. And it sounds like it might have been some points where you left. And yeah, if you want to tell us about that, I mean, if it's something you prefer not to talk about, that's fine too. It doesn't matter. We're just trying to fill in the blanks of kind of how things went in Taiwan, in particular for the pandemic, I guess.
Mm. So I think that, when the pandemic started, that was by beginning of 2020. And we have a lot of customers, they are panically, they want to cancel the orders. But at the time, because we have our own company in States, Haro, and they already told us that the bike sales is very good. I remember that was by 2020 March. So I tried to convince all my customers to just delay the order, do not cancel. Think the business was coming back. So some take my advice, some didn't. And then when August, everyone found out, oh, the business is so great. So they start placing order like crazy. And then during pandemic, the shipment also have the big problem because there's a lot of breakdown. The shipment was the poor conjunction, and then the aluminum cannot. There's a lot of raw material from China cannot ship to Taiwan. And then that's where since August and September, that's where we saw the bottleneck start coming in the supply chain. So you can see that the pipe is getting full. So you have to try. So at the time, at the time, I didn't know how bad it will be. So we have to organize the whole thing because the bike as a bike we need a complete parts. So we have to sorting out where is the bottleneck parts and which supplier they still have a capacity, and you have to work with all the bond and look into each suppliers. And at the same time, so for example, like we also need to hear what's going on. For example, like, oh, there's a saddle maker that gets what is the company, the fitness company, I forgot, at the time we're very big, Peloton. Yeah, they Peloton, they also occupied, they also take away the capacity from bike business.
Wow.
Yeah, because the welding, the aluminum, the pedal. I remember at the time I asked VP to deliver me the pedal, and they told me they can't because they got 1 million pedals a month from
Peloton.
them. Yeah. And like a Velo at DDK, they all are like being occupied by the fitness. So, at the time, you're not only fighting the capacity with bicycle industry, you're also fighting the capacity with parts with with the fitness industry. So I think at the time, being in Taiwan actually is good because you can really hear and listen and know what's going on. And you are kind of like driving the car with a lot of rocks on the road. So you have to try to navigate all this thing, but it's not easy. And then we all know like Shimano having the very huge delivery issue. They can never ship a complete parts, complete group set to anyone. And so at the time I think, okay, we should just focusing on SRAM. So on the mountain bike, we kind of like selecting all the model and define which one we can produce first. And then if there are some secondary parts like a pedal or stand or whatever, that as long as we can change, we try to convince our customer like to change. I remember the funny story. So I found like expensive mountain bike and we can't get saddle and grip. So I have to spend 3 weeks convince my customer to change the saddle and grip suppliers. I say, do you really want to not shipping the bike just because the grip and saddle? I think that would be stupid. So finally they agree on that. But that's basically day-to-day life, like the information change, you have to change your supplier, call different people. So do you still have capacity? Please reserve for us. So that was much about my 2020 August to 2021 March. That is my day-to-day life.
So it was trying to put like a puzzle together of what was available.
Yes.
And
yes,
what I'm assuming at the beginning, the bike manufacturers were like, no, we'll wait. But then as time was passing, they were probably more receptive to your proposals. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And so you were just pushing with all your capacity to try and substitute these products just to get the bikes out the door. And that was your life, I assume, for the duration of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so
at the time, actually, that's also, I think actually the Taiwanese bike industry, so we say relationship is very important. I have some very good friend, parts maker, and they support us quite a lot. So, but I think the biggest problem at the time is really SRAM and Shimano, especially Shimano. Without Shimano, you can't do anything.
Right. For your business.
Yeah.
And so you did everything you could to continue to keep the products moving by substituting. And it sounds like you were able to make that happen as long as the producers were flexible. And then you said that at a certain point you left Kendstone. Was there a specific reason that you can talk about why you did that?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, when I sold the company to the electronic company, I didn't expect it. The cultural difference between two industry was so huge. So for example, like for me, the most important thing is to adding value, providing the service, and support my customer growth. And we always pursue having like win-win situation for both. That is the reason why you can work with a customer more than 20 years. Because I think it's a corporation. It's not winner takes all. That's always been my philosophy. But and also the company is making money, so that's why they acquire us, because company is making money. But at the time, I noticed that because that electronic company is all professional manager, they are more looking into the short-term revenue, a short-term profit instead of a long-term relationship. So for example, like, when I deal with my customer, we didn't really sign contract because we shake hands and they trust me, I trust them, and that's it. It's very old-fashioned, I would say, but that works. That makes things speed up. The trust is the foundation we had. But when they coming in, when the new owner coming in, so first of all, they say, "Hey, Jayu, I need you to have a 12 to 15% gross margin." I say, well, and first of all, that's impossible because the bike we manufacture are all high-end bike. So for example, like think about that. If you're producing like a 2,000 USA dollar FOB bike or 500 US dollar FOB bike, So actually the efforts we put on assembly doesn't really change that much. Like a road bike, it's quite similar. It's probably you would put more detail, more time on the high-end bike, but it doesn't really make that huge difference. The big difference is actually on the component cost. So if it's a full DRI bike and you still want to charging your customer 12 to 15% gross margin just because the assembly job, I don't think anyone will accept. I keep telling them, we say we are assembly business, we are not a manufacturer. So you should look at the operational income, not the gross margin. So you're using the wrong KPI to measure our business. We don't care. You have to look at that. I say I cannot do that because that's me. I have to raise all my price to my customers. I say, no, my price is price. What I say is what I say. I'm not going to change my pricing to my customer, especially during pandemic. Everyone is suffering. So I say, you only work with them for months, but for me, I work with them for 15 years. So that's difference. We always have up time, good time and bad time, but eventually it evens out and everyone get profit. So I don't think we have to, react just because the short term or like exchange rate or something we can't just make decision based on like a 1 month change. So that's the first argument I have with them. I refuse to change the pricing. And then secondly, that I noticed that because maybe in electronic business, everything they have contract. So when they came to the bike business and we didn't have contract and they think we are old fashioned and not very old fashioned and they want me to overrule all my promise to my customers. I said, I'm not going to do that because that's also my personal reputation.
Sure.
To that. I said, well, if that is the case, and also pandemic. So I think at the time, actually during pandemic, I would like to stay for a longer time because I knew it's not going to be easy. But they look at the gross margin. They say, oh, it's not 12 to 15%. So you are not a good manager. I say, okay, what should I do? If you're not happy, you're the boss. You can ask me to leave.
And so you
but
left.
Basically, I think I left because I have to honor. I can't. I think it's just very big different. It's just a culture difference.
Sure.
But actually, I think that's also the difference between the profession. Maybe not very fair to say, but I think the tendency of the professional manager, they're looking more at the short term
Sure.
profit instead of long term.
Right.
So
Well,
I think that is actually the difference.
And we see that in private equity has come into some European businesses and in cycling and they have much shorter term goals. So, cutting costs, just looking for very, very short term performance. Where I've seen in the family owned businesses or holding companies that own businesses, they understand that there are peaks and valleys, but that certain types of investment, you just have to continue to make, that they will then pay off in the longer term. But yeah, I think professional companies, professional managers, public companies, private equity, they have different goals, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just different. And, in the long term, I guess we'll see which is more sustainable. We'll see in the long term.
Like I said, I think you make a very good point. It's just different. It's nothing right or wrong.
No.
Yeah, it's just different.
No. And to have those types of rules, investors are more happy to put their money into it, right? They're more happy where when it's your money, if it's a family owned business, it's your decision and you can go and take some money in the bank and lose some money for a little while when you know that the business will come back. So it's just, like I said, it's just a difference in management. So you leave. Sorry.
Yeah. I say, so for the company who acquired Kendstone, of course, I know they have their position, they have their board, they have their shareholder they need to explain and talk to. So, again, I think it's just the different opinion and culture. That's it.
Totally. Different goals, different structure. And at the end of the day, we're all just trying to, be profitable at the end of the day. It's just with different methods. So
Yeah,
now that
exactly.
that it sounds like we get through the pandemic, or at least the pandemic is coming to an end, from a lockdown perspective. From what I saw now, what I saw was that there was so much overproduction happening, so much over assembly happening, as everyone knows. Lockdowns, lockdowns end. People are probably less interested in cycling. What did you see happening from at the end of 22 through 23? Like, what are you seeing from your network, from your contacts on the island?
Well, of course, I think the same as everyone else. The island is full of inventory, and in everyone's warehouse, the parts maker probably they have a lot of aluminum and steel or tubing, forging parts, and the bike assembler just have a lot of Shimano and SRAM, and then or complete bike tires. Yeah, I think it's similar to Europe. But at the same time, actually, I would like to. I think there's a more important is besides to talk about what we already seeing right now is I think the biggest problem of the bike supply chain is lack of efficiency and lack of flexibility. I always see that is the biggest problem. Even in the past, that always be the biggest. What I see that is always be the biggest bottleneck and problem in the bike industry. But before pandemic, it works, so nobody want to change it. And now we will see what could bring us in the pandemic is excess inventory that your cash has been held, the company bankrupt because they cannot turn their inventory into the cash. So, but I think that is a more important question for people to think about is how can we make our supply chain more efficient and more flexible?
Well, before we go into what exactly that means or what you think should be done, how do you have a sense of how close to, like, where are we at in the whole curve of getting through all this inventory, in your opinion?
I think USA market will recover first. And so right now I have my own business, and one of the business is I working with Walmart. Yeah, very different from Cervelo to Walmart bike, so that's very, very different.
So
And actually,
you're still
I think for mass markets, they already the inventory position is kind of like in the from what I heard is already in the much healthier side. So we will see the mass market will recover by 2024. That's for sure.
so you're hearing. Can you tell us what business you're in now with that you're doing mass market bikes? What is that, Haro still?
No. It's not Haro. It's Oza Trail, Walmart their own brand. So right now I have one of my passion is sustainability.
Yes.
So I have a sustainability company. That is
Okay.
one. And at the same time, I still have friends asking me to help on the supply chain and the bike manufacturer. So yeah, it's kind of like a side project. And I think by 2022, my friend asked me, he's designed for Walmart, and he said, "Hey, Jayu, do you want to make a Walmart bike in Taiwan because they need to get out of China to avoid the 25%?" And I said, "Oh, okay, that's just one bike. It should be easy." So I didn't have any. I only have one person at the time, and I don't have any factory. And I said, "Okay, this should be easy. I can help you with that." So that's how we started that business.
I'm sorry that you're so deep into the business that someone would just come up to you and, hey, let's do a bike for Walmart. Like, that's a dream for anyone else. But for you, it's just yeah, my friend asked me if I wanted to do, I guess I'll do it. I'm sorry, but it's
Yeah.
it's just kind of funny to me. So you consulted, I'm assuming you consulted on this project, and what has that turned into now?
Oh, well, actually, so I'm pretty happy about it because the feedback of so first of all, here's what I think. Oh, so after I talked to Walmart, here's what I think is I don't think Walmart is the enemy of IBD because they're targeting on the very different customer base.
Right.
And also, I think for Walmart, you know, like a Walton family, they have invested a lot to build the trail in Arkansas,
Bentonville.
Bentonville.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah. So they are really investing. I think so. For example, so first of all, my idea at the time is even it's a cheap bike, even even the MSRP is only 398. It's a mountain bike, so it's a very very entry level. But I think that is the start point for a lot of a newcomer for mountain biking.
Of course.
So in the past, when I saw a lot of Walmart bike, actually is pretty shitty. Sorry to say that, but it was pretty shitty.
Okay.
But I think if you can offer a relatively good quality, and so when they start riding it, and they will say, "Oh, okay, so mountain biking is fun. It's fun." And it's easy to pedal, easy to shifting, and with a okay price, with a good price, you know, actually you can keep the newcomer in the sports. And then, of course, then gradually they will level up. They will changing to hydraulic disc brake and changing to better components, and eventually also changing their own bike. So, and then that is not the market that is not the price point Walmart will touch. So they will shift to IBD. So actually, I think it's a good combination. Like you have through Walmart, because you know there's a lot of people visiting Walmart every day, and when they see a good bike and they see good price and buy it, eventually that you will be able to keep more customers in this sports. So that's how I see it.
No, I agree. I agree that the entry level is where, so to get more people into the sport is definitely a plus for the IBDs. During the pandemic, the most affected category of bikes were kids bikes and entry level
Yes.
bikes. But you're saying that anecdotally through this business that you're working with, that category is seeing some light in terms of the stocks, that the stocks
Yes.
seem to be getting back to a more sustainable level, right?
Yes. Yes, that's how I feel over market. I think the good thing, of course, we were never seeing the purchasing behavior like 2021.
No,
We will not seeing that anymore. But if you read some data, actually people are still buying bike.
no, I know they are. I just, for me personally, to see some light, because it's been a brutal year. It's been an absolutely brutal year.
Yeah.
And my worry personally, and I think a lot of the listeners, is that we're not at the end. But if you're saying that the US, which is sort of the leading indicator in the kids bikes, which is the absolute worst of the worst of the worst of the overstocks, because what I heard and what I've seen, and anecdotally again, but from the data, was that the enthusiast bikes, the higher end bikes, the Kendstone bikes, they really weren't nearly as affected as much by the bubble of COVID. Is that a true statement?
Actually, I think road bike is true. I haven't seen road bike being affected that badly, but we can talk that later. But I heard that mountain bike, high-end mountain bike, even e-bike from some other brand, what I heard, are still suffering
Okay.
from the over inventory.
Okay.
So I think right now you can actually, I think everything is kind of like shifting at the beginning. So it's easy. Which category have recovered supply during pandemic was the first one being suffered from over inventory, but also the first category will recover.
Can you repeat
It
that?
just takes
Can
turns.
can you please repeat that again? Because I think it's a really interesting statement.
I think actually it's just taking turns. Like so during pandemic, which category solved their supply chain issue first was the first one suffered from over inventory. But at the same time, will also be the first category to recover.
Okay, so the first one that was able to solve the supply chain issue, the first one that was able to ship the bikes first, probably had the most inventory, but then was able to recover first. And so you think that in your opinion, which category was that?
It's entry level bike, especially for mass market.
Okay. So potentially then who do you think arrived the latest?
So actually, I always keeping the eyes on the road bike because the only reason people think, okay, so this is only my guess. I knew the road bike supply chain was the latest one to recover because Shimano 105
Okay.
problem.
Right.
And also they're changing the new derailleur system. So I knew like by the end of 2022, 2023, and then they are still just trying to recovering the shortage of drivetrain system. So we can say like, okay, at the time you see the demand on the road bike was also because the supply could not catch up.
Sure.
But right now, when the gate open, now the supply chain become more stable. Well, was road bike also suffering from the overstock? Well, I don't know. It's just a guess. But at the same time, I knew in China. So the good thing is actually in China market is really growing quite a lot, especially in road bike. So
Right.
I knew a lot of brands that will be able to offload their inventory in China. So I think maybe road bike will not that bad, but I think mountain bike is definitely mountain bike is not in the good position. I mean, high-end mountain bike is not in the good position because most of mountain bike they're using SRAM parts, and SRAM they recover their supply earlier than Shimano. So when the gate open and then all this bike flood into the market, we can see from like Specialized or Santa Cruz or all the other high-end mountain bike brand. They're having heavily discount like Yeti, Nakona, Specialized, Santa Cruz. Well, you can name the list.
I saw like the 2 bikes for one sale I saw recently, which was really, really tough to see.
Yeah. So I think that is the reason. So I think it's fair to say like who's solving the supply chain problem first, and that is when the inventory flood coming out. And unfortunately, that the mountain bike is not that popular in China, so they don't have a second market to offload those inventory.
Absorb it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really complex scenario, and I appreciate you giving me some anecdotal observations, obviously without all the data, and just like we're sitting here trying to decipher a global market with hundreds of thousands of different places and suppliers and things like that. But I really do appreciate your candor and being kind of diving into this, because this is so impactful to so many people that listen to this podcast. So I think this has been unbelievably valuable from a standpoint of just kind of diving into it, because people are curious about what happens, on the island, what happens from an insider like yourself who, I haven't had the opportunity to talk to someone so deep into the industry. So this has been a huge opportunity. I would like to talk to you again sometime, Jayu. Maybe we can pick another topic. I hope I hope you'd like to do that again, because I think this has been incredibly valuable for everyone in the industry. But we're pushing up against the hour. I want to value your time as well. But again, thank you so much for coming on today. I think we can probably, maybe we can do an update in a couple months to see how things are going, see how things have improved. But if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Just they can send an email to me, just jayu@guamblo.com.
Okay, cool. And you're also on LinkedIn, right?
But yes, I'm also on LinkedIn. It's a very interesting opportunity as well. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun to talk to you, and I'm very thankful. I met you because you had written an incredibly insightful, and I'll put a link to your article on LinkedIn in the notes for the show. But you wrote a really insightful article on LinkedIn about the state of the industry. I guess it's been a few months now, but I'll link it.
Oh.
I'll definitely link it in the notes so people can read it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jai. You have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.